Hello SPED 2010 students. I hope everyone's having a great week. So I can't believe next week is fall break. So next Monday and Tuesday we will not be having classes in person, but of course we will still have our week 7 that you will be working on, and it will be open for you to work on. So even though it's fall break, we still have work that will be submitted next week. You just won't have in-person physical classes on the 9th and 10th of October. So that just to give you a heads up that that's what's happening next week. So we are actually starting a new module, Module 3. So like I mentioned, the way that this course is laid out, you'll see here in the table of contents on the left side, you're going to see Module 1. Now this module just has assignments that you can refer back to, your field work, like service learning, any kind of resources, those sorts of things. Module 2 is where we actually started our content. There are 5 weeks in each module. So this week, our quiz 1, or our test over Module 2, is open. So in Module 2, week 5, and I also emailed this to you, there is a study guide. So there's 2 places for you to find it. If you go into week 5, underneath assignment, and you scroll all the way down, you're going to see study guide for Module 1 quiz. So please make sure that you look at that. I also emailed it to you. So what will happen is you will take your quiz 1 or your test over Module 2 weeks 1 through 5. This is a test that you will complete on your own. You can go to assessments and click on quizzes, and then you'll see here on quiz 1, it's available. Yesterday opened October 2nd at 8 a.m. and it closed October 8th, Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So it's due this Sunday, October 8th. So the test is timed. You do have 2 attempts at the quiz. So what happens is, once you study, and I would suggest studying and using the guide because it is a multiple choice, fill in the blank sort of answer test. So it's not all multiple choice. So use the study guide, use your notes that you've taken, use the textbook, anything that you want. Just keep in mind that because it is timed, if you spend most of your time trying to flip through the books and go through the PowerPoints, that you will run out of time. You do have 2 attempts. I will take the highest grade. So just make sure that you are always studying and making sure that you look at the feedback, see if there's anything that maybe you are unaware of, or maybe you need to go back and look at and study a little bit further. But you do have 2 attempts. I'm not going to proctor the exam, so you don't have to have a webcam or anything like that. You would take on your own time. Just don't wait till the last minute. What I've noticed, people are taking the test and they'll do it once at the last minute, and then that doesn't give them an opportunity to take it a second time if they need to have a higher grade. So it is a lot of information. It's 5 weeks worth of material, so it is a lot to study for, but it is open notes, which will help you if you have been taking notes. So just keep that in mind. So that is something that you need to be mindful of that is due this week. Another thing I wanted to mention is that October 1st, so last Sunday, you had to submit your interview or your peer-reviewed article. So remember, you were to choose one of them. So if you were to scroll down to major assignments, you're going to see interview or journal report peer-reviewed article. So if you've not completed that assignment, please go in and complete it. I usually give you a leeway of about 3 days, but if it's past that point, then we need to have a conversation if you've not got that in. I am in the process of still grading those, so once I've graded them, I will send you out an email explaining that the assignment's graded and you can look at your grade. So like I said, we are going to work in Module 3. So we're starting a new unit. So to get to the unit, you click on Module 3. Now, just like it was laid out before for Module 2, at the top just gives you an overview explaining what we're actually going to be talking about, what we're going to be learning about, and the content that you're going to be receiving. So this module is really important because we're going to really start out looking at the pre-referral process. So that means if you suspect a student has a disability or there's something going on and you want to get them tested for special education, there is a process that you have to go through before you can refer that child. We also look at the RTI process, which is response to intervention, and how that plays a role or a part in the pre-referral process, and what that looks like in an inclusive classroom. And then we also look at IEP. So once the child has been assessed and evaluated and they are eligible to receive services, we have to implement an IEP or an individualized education plan. So we go over who's part of the team, which obviously you will be as a gen ed teacher. What does that look like? Who's involved? How are the parents? How do we create this IEP? What are the components of the IEP? There's really a lot that you have to look at. In week 7 and 8, we're really going to be diving really deeply into classroom management and student behavior, and what that looks like in an inclusive classroom for those students who have special needs. We will be looking at intervention plans, how do you collect data, and what are functional behavior supports, and how does this data support that moving forward with that functional behavioral assessment. And then in week 9, we're going to be looking at students with different disabilities. And then in week 10, we're going to look at those high leverage practices, those evidence-based practices, which is also connected to what you'll be doing with your co-teaching assignment. So that's what will happen in Module 2. I always give you a course outcome and how everything is laid out like a curriculum map, so you can click on that so you can see what activities you'll be doing and how these learning objectives are related to our course outcomes. So let's go ahead and get into week 6. So for week 6, we're really going to be looking specifically at the educational framework and the pre-referral process. As I mentioned, if we suspect a child, there's something going on, or maybe that child has been diagnosed with disability and we're trying to get them referred to receive special education services, there is a process that we need to go through. What does that referral process look like? And what is your role as an educator in the referral process? We also look at response to intervention, or RTI, and how this plays a factor in the referral process. And then once the student's been evaluated and assessed and they are eligible to receive services, we have to implement an IEP. So we have to create this individualized plan for the student to support them, and what kind of goals will be included and what components are actually in an IEP. So here's my objectives this week. I'm going to identify the required members of the IEP team. I'm going to look at the learning environments, and we're going to go back to that least restricted environment that we talked about a few weeks ago, and what that would mean in terms of if a student's eligible and we have an IEP in place. How do we use response to intervention in a classroom? We're going to identify those learning factors that may influence stability. Okay, so this means that it adversely affects a student with disabilities. And how do we put those supports and modifications in place? And then we're going to describe elements that are inside that IEP, right? And how are we going to use those to write measurable annual goals in that IEP for those students with special needs? So in the Teacher's Guide to Special Education, these chapters are really important because they dive into a lot of what we're going to be talking about, right? So in chapter 2, we're going to look at the educational framework, the pre-referral process. So included in that is what we call the RTI, or the response to intervention. We also look at what MTSS is, and this is a multi-tiered system of support, okay? So specifically pay attention to page 28 and 29. Created to this multi-tier system of support is what we call the 3-tier framework, which is elaborated on page 30 of your textbook. Then we move on into differentiated instruction on page 31 through 34, and then we look specifically at universal design for learning, this framework. and how that is used in an inclusive classroom. And this is on pages 34 through 37. And then we move into the pre-referral process, response to intervention in terms of how do we use that if we're evaluating students to determine if they're eligible or not to receive special ed services. We are also looking at, moving on into chapter 3, we look at the evaluation process. How do we assess these students? What are the requirements before you can refer a child? What happens during testing? What kinds of data are we trying to gather? And what kind of assessments would we use? How are the parents involved in this evaluation process? What is the report that we use to help us plan in our IEPs? And then in chapter 4, we look specifically at IEPs, or individualized education plans. So we look at who are the members, what is their roles in this. If we're talking about related services, how are they implemented, and how are they part of this IEP team? So you also have an IRIS module this week that specifically talks about IEP. It's really good. It will allow you to go a step further into the IEP. So even though you're going to be completing 2 IRIS modules, you'll see down here under assessments, you're only going to be submitting one part of the IRIS module. So you have 2 parts. They broke this up because it was very long. So IRIS module, the first part you're going to be doing is how do we develop high quality IEPs, right? These individualized education programs. So there is an assessment component within this module, but you're not turning that assessment component in, even though you will complete it. That is to help you study. IRIS module part 2 is really looking at the components inside of that document of the IEP. Again, you will complete the assessment part of this after you finish the module, and that's what you will actually submit. So you're submitting only part 2 into Dropbox. Okay, now remember, it is worth 10 points, and it will be due Sunday, October the 8th. I gave you some keywords and concepts down here. I actually gave you links to the specific websites, like what is an IEP? And I have a link to a response to intervention, which is a tiered approach to instructing students, instructing all students. Then we talk about differentiated instruction, what is universal design for learning, and how does that framework help us in an inclusive classroom? And then we're looking at present levels of performance, which is something that you will see. It's like a required component inside the IEP. What does it look like? How do we create it? And how does this help us with the goals of the child? So I just want to preface, sometimes these links don't always work. If you find a link that doesn't work, please email me, let me know. I'm human, I make mistakes when things get copied over. Sometimes the link becomes inactive. So if this happens, please let me know so I can fix it. So as far as your task, I mentioned that you'll be reading chapters 2, 3, and 4. You will also be reading components 1.2 and all of component 2 in the special education framework. This talks mostly about IEP. So you'll be able to make connections not only with what you read in chapter 4 of the textbook, but with the IRIS modules as well. This is also an opportunity for you to complete a RAD. So I've had some emails about the RADs. Remember, you have to complete 4 of these reading assignment discussions. You had to complete 1, so I chose the article for you, the first one you did. But you still had 3 more that you have to complete. I don't care which weeks you do the articles on. It's up to you. I always tell students, try to pick an article that kind of speaks to you or you want to know more about. But you have 4 in total that you have to complete. Which week you choose, that is up to you. But it is an opportunity this week for you to complete a RAD. That is pretty much the framework of this week. So let's go on in and look at a little bit more in depth of this week. So obviously I put in here the link to a teacher's guide to special education. Remember, this is just a support for you and an assistance to help you gather more information So even though this is not our main textbook, this is a great supplemental resource where we get a lot of great material from. So please make sure that you look at that. We also have Tennessee Special Education Framework. That is also found under Module 1, both of those, so you should be able to get that. And you should at this point already have it downloaded, so you can just go in and look at the component 1.2 and all of component 2. So that will be your reading for the week. I have a Nearpod presentation. You can join by using this code if you go to join.nearpod.com, and then you should be able to put this code in and it should let you go through the Nearpod presentation. So that's a real interactive way, and also allows you to get feedback initially on what you're learning. So make sure that you do that. There is a video I put in here talking about the IEP team process and what that looks like. So please make sure that you watch that video. Again, I always put the transcript in here for you. Some students are not oral learners or visual. You're more of a read-write learner. If you are a read-write learner, then maybe you prefer to read the transcript from the video. So I offer that to you as well. Now, there's extra resources here. This is the website that I put on the main objectives page where we go over overview, goals, and objectives. Again, there's the Teacher's Guide to Special Education supplemental book, the framework, and then again that other website that I put on there for you to look at, which is Misunderstood Minds. This is actually really good. This is actually a really good website because it allows you kind of simulations, if you will, that talks to you about different kinds of supports that certain students will need. Maybe they have attention to organization problems, right? So this lets you look at the basics, maybe the difficulties they have, and then how would you help and support them. So they have attention problems, reading problems, mathematics, resources that's available to you depending on the different kind of support needed. There's also some books and some websites there that give you some additional information, and as well as some videos and multimedia. And it breaks it down even into articles based on what the situation or support is needed for that student. This is a really great website. So even if you can't look at all it now, go ahead and save it as a tab. That way you can go back and look at it later. Okay, there's a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation on RTI evaluations and eligibility, and how this response to intervention plays into the part of evaluating and seeing if students are eligible to receive special education services. Now keep in mind, when we're looking at that, we're looking at under IDA and the State Tennessee Department under special education. So as always, I give you citation and references. Now, those are all the learning resources available to you for week 6 this week. If you scroll down, I always have a box that says assignments. You'll see here that I told you that the quiz is open. I put a link there for you to click on it to take you to the quiz. You can also access the quiz by going to assessments and clicking on quizzes. So there's 2 places for you to get to the quiz. Just keep in mind you do have 2 attempts, but it does close this Sunday, October the 8th. I even put a Nearpod quiz review in there. This gives you feedback to see how you're doing, maybe what you need to go back and look at. I went ahead and put the article in here. Again, this is an optional RAD for you. If you've only completed 1, I suggest doing this and then the rest from here on out, because you do have to have 4 in total. And again, I give you the rubric. So when you click on this, it'll give you access to the article and the discussion board. Now, for your assignments, as I mentioned, you will be completing the assessment part for IRIS modules. The IRIS module is really going into that professional development of IEPs, and there's 2 parts. The first part is really how do we develop these high-quality IEPs. Then we look at the second part, which is the IEP document itself and all its components that's included. So you are going to complete, there's a note sheet available here for you. This is to help you study. The second note sheet is the one that you will actually submit to Dropbox, okay? And I even put an asterisk here to let you know this is the part you will submit. This is not one you will submit. It will just be for review for you for later. Okay, so that's what your assessment this week will be. All right, guys, so that's all of week 6. I hope that you learn a lot this week. I hope that you pay attention to the chapters in the guidebook, because I feel like there's a lot you can get out of it. And then pay attention to the Nearpod presentation, the PowerPoint I gave you, and then also the IRIS modules. It's going to be a wonderful way. So you're going to get a lot of this content in multiple facets. So this allows you to be able to make deeper connections with the content. So remember, as a gen ed teacher, you will be utilizing these framework models. And this is really going to help you as a teacher in the classroom, especially in an inclusive setting. So please take note. Really make sure that you understand and comprehend this, because in the classroom you are going to be utilizing not only the framework, but you are going to be able to support the children that you need that come into your room. So I hope that you pay special attention and that you get a lot from this week. All right, that's all I have for you. Remember, don't forget to take quiz 1, which is your first test over module 2. And as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Take care, guys.